That night Dr. Lesh returns, and she is not alone. She brought with her help the Freelings are in desperate need of, an extraordinary clairvoyant, the one, the only, Tangina Barons, played by Zelda Rubinstein. How good of a psychic is she? Well, she gets one over on Steven when he tries to disprove her. In spite of everything that's happened, he's fairly skeptical towards the idea of psychics, and when she asks why Carol Ann's room is locked, he tries to answer her with his mind, but she's not giving him the time of day.
I am addressing the living.
No, I thought you said this Tangina Barons was an extraordinary clairvoyant.
I just don't like trick answers.
Did I mention the movie is full of strong female characters? I think Tangina might have tipped the beaker though. She is less of a strong character and more like a stock, convenient character. But honestly, she fits like a glove in this story, and by God we need some easy answers at this point. For all the detail I've gone into, from this point on the film is fairly straightforward. We've had our conflict and our mystery and our struggle, now it's about time for all of this to be wrapped up. Tangina's ability lends her the answers to all of the questions the family have had. Most importantly, Carol Ann is alive and they're going to retrieve her. But first, she needs to explain what exactly is happening here.
There is no death. It is only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness.
Tangina tells them the spirits drawn to the house are captivated by Carol Ann, because she is a living presence in the lifeless nightmare in which they are trapped. They themselves can't or won't find the light, but crowd around her because she radiates warmth and joy and everything they now lack but desperately cling to. Simply retrieving Carol Ann won't be enough. She needs to lead them to the light, and to make her do that, Tangina will need Diane's help. But that's not all. There is more. All of this is not just a result of a spiritual fluke. There is intent and purpose to it. A terrible presence is in there with her, unlike anything Tangina has ever felt.
I don't know what hovers over this house, but it was strong enough to punch a hole into this world, take your dog away from you.
It keeps Carol Ann very close to it, and away from the spectral light. It lies to her. It says things only a child could understand. It's been using her to restrain the others. To her, it simply is another child.
To us, it is the beast.
As a kid, I thought she meant that the poltergeist was literally the devil himself. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that didn't make any sense. I mean, why would the devil be concerned with one little girl? It didn't make any sense. So I think she's being metaphorical. I think she's calling it the beast simply because she doesn't know what else to call it. But, much like everything else in this movie, it is open to interpretation. And I like that. It maintains the alluring sense of mystery without diminishing the thing as a threat.
Now let's go get your daughter.
I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, I really like how the confrontation is mostly a metaphysical one, with Tangina announcing that Carol Ann is restrained but thinks it's safe, so she tells Steven to wake her out of it by frightening the girl. It only makes sense for an immaterial spiritual plane to be built on emotion and impression more than logic and matter. But because we're never shown any of it, we must imagine what it looks like.
Now clear your minds. It knows what scares you. It has from the very beginning.
On the one hand is the plan itself. Earlier in the movie, Robbie suggested that if he dies, they could tie a rope around him so he could go find his sister, and then they could pull both of them back. It's very convenient such a silly idea is exactly what they end up going with, and it actually works. Still, the scene is a cinematic marvel to behold, and demeaning a Spielberg film for being a bit silly is redundant. That's one of the only 2 times we actually get to see what the beast looks like, but Spielberg still found a workaround to make it seem alien and unknowable. Also, you might have realized a plot hole. If the ghost wanted life, there was an open door right there. The way I figure it works is, just like they can't find their way to the light without Carol Ann's help, they can't find their way to the door. And even if they could, they would still be spirits. And incidentally, that is why the beast didn't just stretch through the door and eat Stephen. It might have looked big and imposing, but it was still an immaterial being. It couldn't physically harm him. Or at least that's what makes sense to me. Anyway, Diane and Carol Ann materializes in a rain of ectoplasm, and for a moment it seems as if they didn't make it. But then, as if waking from a dream...
Hi, Daddy!
Reunited at last, the investigators leave the family to recover, with Tangina stating the house is clean. But with so many terrible memories here, the Freelings waste no time moving out. And it feels glorious. They're back in the world they know, the world where it seems impossible for anyone to have a problem, and everything that was is like a bad dream. Like it never could or never did happen. The sun is shining, the mimosa is blooming, Carol Ann doesn't even seem to remember anything. And tonight they're leaving, so that every day can be the same as this, and same as it always was.
How's Teague taking?
Well, you know Teague. He won't go to hell for an answer.
What are you gonna tell him?
I'm gonna give him directions.
A sweet, happy ending to a grim fairy tale as we expect from Steven Spielberg. It was still Tobe Hooper who directed this, and in the 80s, surprise 4 facts were all the rage. They're leaving tonight, but first Steven needs to pick up a few things at the office. And with Dana staying over at a friend's house, it's just Diane, Robbie and Carol Ann at the house, safe and secure in the certainty that it's all over. Even Robbie finds it easy to fall asleep, but he still doesn't like that clown doll. And I get it. Even as a kid, even after watching this movie, I have never been afraid of clowns. But this thing specifically can fuck right off! Okay, it's worse not knowing where it is. This moment has been recognized as one of the most frightening scenes in horror cinema. What's perhaps less known is the doll genuinely almost killed Oliver Robbins. When filming, that arm got wrapped too tight around his neck, and when he started screaming that he couldn't breathe, Hooper and Spielberg thought he was ad-libbing. It wasn't until his face started turning blue that they realized he really was choking. And then they got the thing off of him. It occurs to me this movie might serve as an example for why you should not put kids in dangerous situations when making a movie. And then there is this scene. I don't know what's going on in this scene. I mean, I have eyes, I can see she's being assaulted by ghosts. I'm talking about the specifics. Ghosts don't have dicks. But no, it isn't over. Again, the closet glows bright as the deathly membrane is torn at from the other side, and the living will not interfere. Unable to hold her, Diane struggles through the pain and terror to save her children from the approaching menace, but the beast will not let her. See? I told you Spielberg solved it. Why would an immaterial being be limited to one form? The beast has many! Overwhelmed, Diane falls down the stairs, only to find touching all of anything she is met by electricity surging through her body. Beyond necessity and distraction, she is punished for the part she played in the coup against the beast. The netherworld oozes out between the cracks, demanding what was taken from it back, desperate to once again take hold of the angel.
No more.
I found a lot of people are confused as to why the Beast still wants Carol Ann if all the ghosts that were following her around are gone. It's up for interpretation. Personally, I think the Beast is malicious for the sake of it, that it wants to cause pain and suffering simply because it can. And having been foiled, I think it's just plain pissed. But that doesn't account for everything. Diane manages to get out of the house and call for help, but in her panic she meanders too close to the edge of the unfinished pool and falls in. And for all the build-up the pool has had through the film, it's about time they make use of it. And that's no illusion she is about to wake from. That's not the spirits messing with her. Those bodies are real. Genuinely. In 1982, Spielberg was sued for plagiarism regarding Poltergeist. And as part of the lawsuit, special effects artist Craig Reardon, had to testify to the work he put into the film. And he swore under oath that manufacturing realistic-looking human skeletons, it was too expensive. So instead he acquired 13 real human skeletons from Carolina Medical and dressed them up to look like decomposing cadavers and used them in the film. This, some people believe, manifested in what has been called the Poltergeist curse, where filmmakers who thought they couldn't suffer any consequences from disrespecting the dead suffer the consequences of disrespecting the dead while making a movie about the consequences of disrespecting the dead. Irony! Also, remember what I said about the characters chewing the scenery? That goes double for the climax. After being scared to death and trying to climb out, Diane falls right back down so she can scream some more at the skeletons before she's pulled up by the neighbors come out to check on her. Neighbors that prove useless as neither one dares to enter the house. And by the way, the ghosts can bend space now. Yeah, they can just do that. And also... So we do get a slight glimpse of the other side, and it's a lot more fleshy and disgusting than one might have expected. But it still looks really cool. In fact, every scene in this film is a joy to behold, so you don't really notice how awkward the pacing is. Unless you have watched it a dozen times over to make a needlessly long review of it. See what I'm getting at? Steven returns home to find a storm is waiting for him. The building has descended into chaos with the spirits making their final stand. Inside his family is screaming, but as he rushes to help them, the ground explodes in a spray of dirt and rocks as a coffin shoots up out of the ground. Then another follows, and 4 more. The dried up remains spill out in front of him as if to say, "Look and see." This is not a senseless act of cruelty or a random malignance. This is vindication. This is vengeance. How can there be bodies here? The cemetery was... That's when he sees Mr. Teague, and it all falls into place.
You son of a bitch, you moved the cemetery, but you left the bodies, didn't you?
Mr. Teague built Cuesta Verde. Steven's family was the first to move in. Steven helped occupy the land, ignorant to its content, as the dead were trampled upon and forgotten. As Carol Ann was born and the hurting, errant shadows surrounded her for warmth and joy, torturing themselves with what they could never have, their bitter miasma lured the beast here, and it set upon her with impunity. All because of him! All because he left the bodies and only moved the headstones! It's understandable if you think the man is an asshole. But some people take it further than others. James Karen, the man who played Mr. Teague, actually received hate mail for how he treated the Freelings in this movie. I just want to leave you with that. The inability to separate fiction from reality was not something the internet invented. For a full minute they chew what should be 10 seconds of footage, with the family getting into the car, Dana returning home, and all of them driving off as the neighborhood starts to explode around them. But it's all worth it for some of the most impressive practical effects work the 80s gave us. How did they do that? They built a 6-feet scale model of the building, including furnishings, and put it atop a vacuum machine, together with a couple of wires to pull at it from the inside, and filmed at 300 frames a second. They relatively accurately mimicked how it might look like if the building had been sucked into a hole in space, and then replayed it at a 15th of the speed. By the way, Spielberg kept the debris from that model, and he now keeps it in a Perspex cube in his office. I would really like to see it someday. With this final revelation, the movie comes to a close. The Freelings leave Cuesta Verde never to come back, and drive off into the night. Oh, and one more thing. Remember, kids, Dumbbox bad. Let's ignore that moral. I love this movie! Hand on heart, I knew very little about Poltergeist when I first decided to make this video. To me, it was just a good movie that I remembered from when I was a kid. But as I got to research it and read up on what was involved in its production, my appreciation for it has only grown. Half the things worth talking about aren't even part of this video, and still there was so much I felt I couldn't leave out. But that's what I love about this hobby of mine. It gives me direction and purpose in learning more about the movies that I watch and love. The film was originally meant to be a spiritual sequel to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but Spielberg couldn't decide whether to make it heartwarming or frightening. He decided to make both, but he was contractually unable to make another film while working on E.T., so he handed directorial duties over to Tobe Hooper, who was less interested in a science fiction angle and decided to make it a ghost film. I think that's what gives it such a unique feeling, with the haunting feeling much more physical than a traditional ghost movie. But you can pick up traces of that original intent throughout the film, such as Carol Ann being abducted by a bright light, Ryan suggesting open TV channels are susceptible to signals from outer space, and the entire house eventually being sucked up into the sky. It makes me curious what the original film would have been like, but I'm still happy we got this one. For all the talk I offered about it being part of my childhood, I think I only saw it 3 or 4 times as a kid, but it stayed with me ever since, and it put me on the trail of being the man that I am today. I honestly don't know whether to feel thankful or hold that against it, but this is one of the few movies that I consider a part of me, and I am very happy I got to explore it this Halloween. I just wish I could have had this video up on Halloween as well. Sorry about that. So what did I mean about waking up from the American dream? Most obviously, it's a film about white Americans tormented by the vengeful spirits of the bodies the community is built upon. But that's just a similarity to a practice that transcends race or nationality. In the 1980s, the American economy was booming, and with it came a renewed sense of trust in business, government, and society, something that could only last for so long. Much like faith or economy, nationalism only works for as long as people believe in it, and now there was a new tool to propagate that conviction. Television. But people were catching on. Watergate, the Vietnam War, McCarthyism, all these things were simply forgotten about for the convenience of thinking the dream was real. The world is made up of flawed, stupid, self-centered people who will do things without thinking them through. That's simply the nature of being human. The Freelings live their lives in the comfortable certainty that nothing bad can or will happen to them, ignorant of the secret buried beneath their feet, but nevertheless vulnerable to the fallout. They leave the movie disillusioned by their experiences and reject the dream as a danger. Of course, all of it is at the hands of one man, Mr. Teague, but let's not discount this as an isolated event by one bad apple. People fuck up, intentionally and unintentionally, and you can never entirely trust things won't go wrong. But maybe work to try and make them rather than assume they will. It's a worthwhile lesson to remember, and you don't need to believe in ghosts to take that with you. Poltergeist is not a movie that I can give an objective assessment of, because I honestly don't care about the weaknesses it holds, and unfortunately I don't think we're going to see another movie like it again. Not only was it a fluke of able creative forces coming together before profit, unfortunately the rumors of the Poltergeist curse aren't unfounded. It's tragic, but Dominic Dunn, who played Dana, was strangled to death by her ex-boyfriend just months after the movie came out, and Heather O'Rourke succumbed to congenital stenosis in 1988. Today, she is best remembered for the character she played in this movie, with even her tombstone referring to her as Carol Ann. A kid should never have to die that young in general, but I must own up to a certain selfishness about it. I would have liked to see her in more movies. I really would have liked to see some sequels to Poltergeist. It's a shame Spielberg never made any sequels. This movie doesn't have any sequels! Yeah!